On September 15th, John and I left the safe confines of the CRNC offices to head towards the White House. We'd heard about an anti-war protest going on and thought we'd better investigate. So we began our journey and headed for the local metro station to plan our route. It wasn't long, of course, before we spotted our first 60s-era holdover hippies. Thankfully, the train soon came, and our investigation began. But we couldn't be entertained all day. We had interviews to conduct. And right when we needed them, the conspiracy theory lefties showed up. The sign here belonged to this guy. I'll let him speak for himself.
9/11 was an inside job. The U.S. elements within the U.S. government, not the whole U.S. government, but elements within the U.S. government were involved in the financing, the planning, and the execution of the events of 9/11. We had three towers, three steel structures buildings that fell at free fall speed. So that's physically impossible for the buildings to fall, to collapse at that speed, at free fall speed. Physically, the things that occurred on 9/11 couldn't have occurred in this universe, or on this planet. I don't know about Pluto. You start seeing a link between government officials and the events of the day.
No, when you say government officials, I mean, how high up do you think that went? Like, who knew about it?
Well, Norman Mineta, who was the transportation secretary at the time, he testified to the 9/11 Commission that they were in a bunker area, I think it was below the White House, and that he was there with Dick Cheney. Dick Cheney was there. They didn't even know, who was behind the bombings at that time. And Cheney is already saying, we're going to use this to go after Iraq. They are that criminal that they could be involved in allowing the planes to hit the World Trade Center and murder 3,000 people. That's the first step. We allowed them to attack us, to whip up public sentiment, so we'd go to get involved in the war. What's the reason behind it? There's a master plan going on, but no one's going to believe the master plan. There is a plan, to swing this country into a full-fledged fascist state. But even beyond that,
bewildered by that man, we were a little lost, so we stopped for directions. He pointed us to Ralph Nader, who had this to say about our president and vice president.
Oppose a practice of torture, to arrest thousands of Americans without charges and throwing them in prison without lawyers. They took power illegally from our courts and from our Congress. They spied on millions of Americans randomly without judicial approval. How many more impeachable offenses do those spineless, gutless, hapless?
She's phenomenal. I met her here. I was supposed to be on the bus.
The day didn't seem to end, going from one loony anti-American to the next. But finally, we began to find the people behind the curtain. The eternal spring of the radical left, of course, are the socialists. Their young members were there, and so were the professional protesters of the 1960s. Our next guest.
From before March of 2003, like I was opposed to the previous Gulf War, like I was opposed to the Vietnam War, which is when I was growing up.
these protests back then too? Yeah.
This is not a society, in my opinion, that we can reform. We have to create a different society, one that is not based on the almighty dollar.
Okay.
Okay?
So why?
That's the short version.
Sure. Why? I guess since we're here for an anti-war thing, why are you against the war? Like what?
I believe that we went to war because Iraq is sitting on oil. I believe that there are U.S. bases I don't believe, it's a fact, there are U.S. bases all around the Middle East, and not because of dates.
Were you against the Afghanistan invasion? Yeah.
They didn't direct their plane to Mr. Bush. They directed their plane against innocent people. I want to attack the people who are responsible for a society of war and war profiteering.
Right next door, this guy wanted to let us know who was really behind all the terrorism.
Afghanistan, their opium crop is like insane right now. And I mean, you've seen commercials where they're like, terrorism, that's how, terrorists get their money from drugs, illegal drug trade. It's like, okay, well you had the chance. The Taliban had been running the show, and they'd pretty much eradicated the poppy crop. I mean, you guys came in and toppled those cats, and now opium's all over the place. So really, who's funding terrorism? I think it's you. You left that place a mess.
After over an hour of time spent wandering around, we noticed the crowds were beginning to thin. That could only mean one thing. The march was beginning. And as is tradition, I suppose, there was a hippie drum circle. For who they were, we sat back and watched the crowd stride by on their way to their die-in protest, where they would all fall down and pretend to be Iraqis shot dead by American soldiers. It was disappointing to see the flag flown upside down, people chanting to take down the government, and to have to listen to people as they explained to me how our great United States of America is the greatest perpetrator of evil and terrorism in the world.
Occupation is a crime! Occupation is a crime!
I wondered who in the political mainstream would ever listen to these people. Who in their right mind would consider them a base? What party or candidates would ever accept millions of dollars, volunteer support, and public endorsements from such a horrible group? But as we entered the metro system on the way home, the College Democrats, the official youth arm of the Democratic Party, answered my questions for me.